The notification on my phone read $8 million and 17 cents. I stared at the screen for the third time that morning, sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic outside a Starbucks in downtown Phoenix, wearing the same thrift store button-down I'd owned for 4 years. The barista inside probably made more in tips last week than most people thought I earned in a month. But here's the thing about being secretly wealthy: when your entire family has written you off as the family disappointment, nobody talks about money until someone else doesn't have it. And nobody asks questions when you keep driving the same car and living in the same modest apartment you've had since college. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 3 years I've been living a double life that would make my relatives' heads spin if they knew the truth. But they don't know, because they stopped paying attention to me somewhere around my sophomore year of college, when I switched majors from pre-med to computer science. That was the day my mother, Patricia, looked at me across our kitchen table and said, with the kind of disappointed sigh that cuts deeper than anger, "Well, I guess we can't all be doctors like your sister's going to be." My sister Jessica had always been the golden star in our family constellation. 2 years younger than me, she'd been accepted to Arizona State University's pre-med program with a partial scholarship before she even graduated high school. She had the grades, the ambition, the kind of confident smile that made adults at family gatherings nod approvingly and say things like, "That girl's going places." I, on the other hand, had spent most of high school in my bedroom, teaching myself programming languages and building websites for local businesses that paid me in cash under the table. While Jessica was dissecting frogs and memorizing the periodic table, I was creating my first mobile application. It was nothing fancy, just a simple task management app that helped people organize their daily routines. I called it Dayflow, and I built it during the summer between high school and college, working 16-hour days in my childhood bedroom while the rest of my family assumed I was just wasting time on my computer like always. The app launched quietly on both iOS and Android platforms in August, right before I started my freshman year at Arizona State. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my girlfriend Sarah, who I'd been dating since junior year of high school. Something told me to keep it to myself, maybe because I'd grown so accustomed to my family's dismissive attitude toward anything I created that I wanted to see if it could succeed, without their skepticism weighing it down. Dayflow gained traction slowly at first, a few dozen downloads the first week, then a few hundred, then a few thousand. By October, it was being featured in productivity blogs. By December, it had hit the top 10 in the App Store's productivity category. By the end of my freshman year, it was generating enough revenue that I was able to pay for my entire college education without taking out a single student loan. But here's where the story gets interesting. Instead of celebrating or telling my family about my unexpected success, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I kept quiet. I continued living like a broke college student, driving my old Honda, shopping at thrift stores, and splitting pizza with roommates who assumed I was just scraping by like everyone else. Meanwhile, I was reinvesting every penny of profit back into improving the app and developing new features. The money kept growing. Dayflow was generating 6 figures annually by my sophomore year, when Jessica was struggling through organic chemistry and my parents were taking out a second mortgage to help pay for her medical school applications. I watched my father, Robert, work double shifts at the auto parts store he managed, coming home exhausted every night but never complaining because Jessica's education was an investment in the family's future. Nobody asked about my education costs because everyone assumed computer science was cheaper, easier, less important. When relatives asked about my major at family gatherings, my mother would wave her hand dismissively and say, "Oh, Marcus is doing something with computers. You know how he is." Then she'd immediately pivot to Jessica's latest academic achievement, her MCAT prep courses, her volunteer work at the local hospital. By my junior year, Dayflow had caught the attention of a major tech company that wanted to acquire it. The offer was substantial enough that I almost choked on my coffee when I read the email. After 3 weeks of negotiations with lawyers I hired using fake names and shell companies to protect my identity, I sold Dayflow for $2 million. I was 21 years old, sitting in a law office in downtown Phoenix, signing papers that made me a millionaire while my family thought I was in my computer science capstone class. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica was drowning in student debt from her first year of medical school, my parents were refinancing their house again to cover her expenses, and I was walking out of that office with enough money to pay off everyone's debts and still have millions left over. But I didn't tell them. Instead, I took that money and did something that surprised even me. I started investing, not just throwing money at random stocks, but actually studying the market, reading financial reports, learning about real estate and emerging technologies. I enrolled in online courses about investment strategies, spent my evenings analyzing companies and market trends instead of partying like other college students. The investments paid off bigger than I'd ever imagined. Within 18 months, my portfolio had doubled. I bought 3 rental properties in emerging neighborhoods around Phoenix, purchased stake in 2 promising startups, and put a significant amount into cryptocurrency just before it exploded. By the time I graduated college, I was worth over $8 million, and my family still thought I was just another struggling computer science graduate with no real prospects. The graduation party was held at my Aunt Linda's house in Tempe. The whole extended family was there, aunts and uncles and cousins, all gathering to celebrate Jessica's acceptance into her medical residency program and my completion of what everyone considered a backup degree. I remember standing in the corner of Linda's backyard, holding a plastic cup of cheap beer, listening to Uncle David tell anyone who would listen about how proud he was of Jessica for making something of herself. "And Marcus," he said, glancing over at me with what I can only describe as polite pity, "well, I'm sure he'll find something stable eventually, maybe tech support or something. There's always work for people who know computers." I nodded and smiled, the same smile I'd perfected over years of being underestimated. What Uncle David didn't know was that I was wearing a watch that cost more than his annual salary, hidden under a long-sleeved shirt I'd bought at Goodwill, specifically for occasions like this. The cognitive dissonance was almost amusing, if it wasn't so depressing. Jessica looked radiant that day, surrounded by congratulations and admiration, wearing a dress our parents had bought her specifically for the occasion. She deserved the recognition, honestly. Medical school is no joke, and becoming a doctor requires dedication and intelligence that I genuinely respected. But watching the family fawn over her while completely ignoring my achievements that they didn't even know existed created this strange hollow feeling in my chest.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah, my girlfriend who had stuck with me through college, squeezed my hand during Uncle David's speech about Jessica being the future of the Chen family. She whispered, "Your time will come, Marcus. I believe in you." She had no idea that my time had already come and gone and come again several times over. She thought she was dating a recent computer science graduate with uncertain job prospects and a beat-up Honda Civic. She had no clue she was actually dating someone who could buy Uncle David's construction company without blinking. The job hunt charade that followed graduation was perhaps the most surreal part of this entire experience. I had to pretend to apply for entry-level programming positions, go to interviews I didn't need, and act disappointed when companies offered me salaries that represented less than what I made in investment returns in a single week. My parents would ask anxiously about my job search, offering to help with my resume or connect me with people who might have openings. "Don't worry, sweetheart," my mother said during one particularly awkward family dinner. "Not everyone can be as focused as Jessica. Some people just take longer to find their path." She said it with such genuine sympathy that I almost felt guilty for letting her believe I was struggling. I eventually accepted a position at a small software development company in Chandler, a job that existed only on paper but came with a believable salary and regular paychecks that I paid myself from my investment accounts. My parents were relieved. "See," my father said, patting my shoulder. "I knew you'd figure something out. It's not doctor money, but it's honest work." Jessica, meanwhile, was beginning her residency at Phoenix Children's Hospital, working 100-hour weeks and earning the kind of respect and admiration from our family that I'd never experienced. During family dinners, conversations revolved around her patients, her cases, her attending physicians who were mentoring her. She looked exhausted but fulfilled, and I genuinely admired her dedication even as I felt increasingly invisible. The secret wealth created its own strange problems. I was living in a modest one-bedroom apartment near downtown Phoenix, driving the same Honda Civic, shopping at Target, and acting like every purchase required careful consideration of my budget. But on weekends, when I told everyone I was hiking or visiting friends, I was actually staying in a penthouse I'd purchased on the 40th floor of a luxury high-rise, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Salt River Valley. Sarah would talk about our future together, about saving up for a house someday, about how we'd need to be careful with money until my career took off. She'd suggest we split dollar menu items at fast food restaurants, while I had enough money in checking to buy the entire franchise. The guilt of lying to someone I loved was eating at me, but I'd been living this double life for so long that I didn't know how to break character without seeming completely insane. "Maybe in a few years, when you get promoted, we can afford to go on a real vacation," Sarah said one evening as we watched Netflix in my deliberately modest apartment. "I've always wanted to see Europe." I nodded and agreed, knowing I could book us first-class tickets to anywhere in the world without checking my account balance. But how do you explain that to someone who thinks you're barely making ends meet? The investments kept growing. The rental properties I owned were appreciating in value as Phoenix's real estate market exploded. The startups I'd invested in were thriving, one of them going public and multiplying my investment by 12. The cryptocurrency holdings had turned into something resembling monopoly money, the numbers so large they didn't feel real anymore. I was 25 years old, worth over $15 million, and my family still thought I was just getting by. Jessica completed her residency and started her career as a pediatrician. The family celebration was enormous, held at an upscale restaurant in Scottsdale that my parents had saved for months to afford. Everyone came, all the aunts and uncles and cousins, to toast the newest doctor in the family. I sat at the far end of the table, wearing another thrift store button-down, listening to toast after toast about Jessica's accomplishments and bright future. To Jessica, Uncle David said, raising his glass, "who proves that hard work and determination can take you anywhere. She's everything this family can be proud of." The unspoken comparison hung in the air like smoke. Jessica was the success story. I was the cautionary tale, the reminder that not everyone in the family would amount to much. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, and I squeezed back, wondering how much longer I could maintain this elaborate fiction. The money kept growing, my secret life kept expanding, and my family's perception of me remained frozen in time, like I was still that disappointing college sophomore who'd given up on medical school to play with computers. What they didn't know was that while they were celebrating Jessica's first-year doctor salary, I had just closed on my third rental property and was considering purchasing a vacation home in Sedona. The cognitive dissonance was becoming unbearable, but I'd been living this lie for so long that the truth felt more frightening than the deception. The evening ended with my parents driving Jessica home to the apartment they were still helping her afford, while I drove my beat-up Honda back to my modest apartment, where I would spend the evening managing an investment portfolio worth more than most people see in a lifetime. The isolation of secret wealth was something I'd never anticipated, this strange loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who fundamentally misunderstand who you are and what you're capable of. As I sat in my deliberately humble living room that night, looking at my phone screen showing another day's gains in my investment accounts, I realized that somewhere along the way, the secret had stopped being about protecting myself from their skepticism and started being about something else entirely. Maybe it was about seeing how long they could look at me without really seeing me at all. Maybe it was about understanding exactly how little they expected from me, how easily they'd written me off, how comfortable they were with their assumptions about my limitations. Or maybe, if I'm being completely honest, it was about waiting for the perfect moment to show them just how wrong they'd been about everything. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade came on a Tuesday morning in March, when my mother called me at what she thought was my office job. I was actually sitting in my penthouse, reviewing quarterly reports from my investment advisor, when her name appeared on my phone screen. Patricia never called during business hours unless something was urgent, so I answered immediately. "Marcus, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Her voice had that careful, measured tone she used when she was trying not to hurt my feelings. "Are you struggling financially? I mean really struggling?" The question caught me so off guard that I nearly dropped my phone. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the entire Phoenix skyline stretching out below me, a view that cost me $12,000 a month in property taxes alone. "Why would you ask that, Mom?" "Well, Sarah mentioned that you two have been talking about moving in together to save money, and I know entry-level programming jobs don't pay very much. Your father and I have been discussing it, and we want you to know that if you need help with rent or groceries or anything, we're here for you. We don't want you to be too proud to ask." The irony hit me like a physical blow. My parents, who were still paying off credit cards they'd maxed out to help Jessica through medical school, were offering to financially support their son, who had enough money to pay off their mortgage without blinking. The guilt twisted in my stomach as I listened to my mother's genuinely caring voice, offering help I didn't need from resources they couldn't spare. "I'm doing okay, Mom, really. Sarah and I are just being smart about saving money for the future." The lie felt heavier each time I told it, like carrying stones in my pockets that grew larger with every step. "Are you sure? Because Linda mentioned that she saw you shopping at the discount grocery store last week, and she was worried you might be having trouble making ends meet. You know your aunt means well, but she talks, and now the whole family is concerned about you." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my leather chair, the one that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Aunt Linda had indeed seen me at the discount grocery store, but not because I needed to save money. I shopped there specifically to maintain my cover story, buying generic brands and clipping coupons like someone who actually needed to stretch every dollar. The performance had become so automatic that I sometimes forgot I was acting. "Tell Aunt Linda I appreciate her concern, but I'm fine. I've just learned to be careful with money. It's a good habit to have." The words tasted bitter as I spoke them, knowing that my mother would interpret my thriftiness as evidence of financial hardship, rather than the elaborate deception it actually was. After hanging up with my mother, I sat in my penthouse for nearly an hour, staring out at the city and feeling the weight of my double life pressing down on me. The concern in her voice had been genuine, the kind of parental worry that comes from love and care, not judgment. But it also revealed just how completely my family had accepted the narrative that I was barely getting by, that I was the struggling member of the family who needed their sympathy and occasional financial assistance. That evening, I drove my Honda Civic to Sarah's apartment, where she was making dinner on a budget that she carefully tracked in a notebook she kept on her kitchen counter. She worked as a graphic designer for a non-profit organization, earning enough to cover her basic expenses, but not much more. We'd been together for 7 years, and in all that time, she'd never questioned my claims about my modest income or my insistence on splitting everything equally. "Your mom called me today," Sarah said as she stirred pasta sauce in a pot she'd bought at a thrift store. She's worried about you. About us, actually. She thinks we're moving in together because we can't afford separate apartments. I sat at her small kitchen table, watching her cook with ingredients she'd carefully selected based on weekly sales flyers. What did you tell her? I told her we're just being responsible adults who want to build a future together. But Marcus, she seemed really concerned about your finances. She even offered to help us with a security deposit if we need it. Sarah turned to look at me, her expression thoughtful. Are you sure you're okay? I mean financially, because if you're struggling, we can figure something out together. I could pick up some freelance work, or we could look for a cheaper place. The genuine love and concern in her voice made my chest tighten. Here was the woman I loved, offering to work extra hours to help support me, completely unaware that I had enough money to buy her nonprofit organization outright and still have millions left over. The guilt was becoming unbearable, but I'd been living this lie for so long that telling the truth felt impossible. I'm doing fine, really. My job pays the bills, and I'm even managing to save a little bit each month. We don't need to worry. The words came out automatically, another brick in the wall of deception I'd built around my real life. The conversation that night marked the beginning of a shift in how my family perceived my situation. What had started as general disappointment in my career choice was evolving into active concern for my well-being. Over the following weeks, I noticed subtle changes in how they interacted with me. My mother would pack extra leftovers when I visited, insisting I take them home just in case. My father started slipping $20 bills into my jacket pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. Jessica, despite being exhausted from her demanding work schedule, would text me articles about side hustles and freelance opportunities that might help supplement my income. The attention was overwhelming because it was rooted in love, not judgment. They weren't looking down on me for being poor, they were worried about someone they cared about, who they believed was struggling. The distinction made the deception feel even more cruel, like I was taking advantage of their genuine concern for my own psychological experiment. 3 months later, the situation escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was having lunch with Jessica at a restaurant near the hospital where she worked, one of our rare one-on-one conversations that didn't involve the rest of the family. She looked tired but happy, the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from meaningful work. We were talking about her latest cases when she suddenly reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've been thinking about this for weeks, she said, sliding the envelope across the table to me. I know things have been tight for you since graduation, and I know you're too proud to ask for help, but I want you to have this. I opened the envelope and found a check for $5,000, made out in Jessica's careful handwriting. The memo line read, "For my brother, with love." I stared at the piece of paper, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. $5,000 represented a significant portion of Jessica's savings, money she'd carefully set aside from her modest resident salary, while paying off massive student loans. "Jess, I can't take this. You need this money more than I do." "No, I don't. I'm doing fine, and I have a stable income now." "You're still getting established, and I remember how hard those first few years after college can be. Please, Marcus, let me help you. You've always been there for me, even when we were kids. You helped me with my science projects, you drove me to soccer practice when Mom and Dad were working, you listened to me complain about medical school for 4 straight years. This is my way of saying thank you." The check felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. Jessica was offering me money she'd earned through countless sleepless nights in medical school, through the grueling hours of residency, through the stress and pressure of becoming a doctor. She was giving me her hard-earned savings because she believed I was struggling, because she wanted to help her brother, who she thought was barely making ends meet. "I really appreciate this, but I'm doing okay. I don't want you to worry about me. Marcus, I see how you live. The same car you've had since college, the thrift store clothes, the fact that you never go out to eat anywhere that costs more than $10. I know you're trying to be independent, but there's no shame in accepting help from family. We're supposed to take care of each other. I looked at my sister across the table, at her tired but determined face, at the genuine love and concern in her eyes, and I realized that my deception had crossed a line I'd never intended to cross. She was sacrificing her own financial security because she believed in a fiction I'd created. The money wasn't just about dollars and cents, it was about the fundamental dishonesty of our relationship, the way I'd allowed her to worry about me while hiding the truth about my actual circumstances. Keep the check for now, I said finally, sliding it back across the table. Let me think about it, okay? I promise I'll let you know if I really need help. Jessica smiled, the kind of relieved expression that comes from feeling like you've done something meaningful for someone you love. Okay, but the offer stands. And Marcus, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I know Mom and Dad sometimes make it seem like your career isn't as important as mine, but what you do matters too. You're building something, even if it's taking longer than you expected. The conversation haunted me for days afterward. I kept the check in my wallet, not because I intended to cash it, but because it served as a constant reminder of how far my deception had gone. Every time I opened my wallet to pay for something, I saw Jessica's careful handwriting, her expression of love and support for a brother she believed was struggling. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable, but I'd been living the lie for so long that I didn't know how to escape it. How do you tell your family that you've been pretending to be poor for years, while secretly accumulating millions of dollars? How do you explain that their concern and offers of help, while genuinely appreciated, were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of your actual situation? The breaking point came 6 weeks later, during what should have been a routine family dinner at my parents' house. I'd driven over in my Honda Civic, wearing my usual thrift store uniform, carrying a bottle of wine that cost $12 because anything more expensive would have raised questions about my budget. The dinner conversation was typical, Jessica talking about her patients, my parents discussing their plans for refinancing the house again to pay off some remaining medical school debt. "We're so proud of both our children," my father said, looking between Jessica and me with the kind of parental satisfaction that comes from seeing your kids become adults. "Jessica's saving lives, and Marcus is building his career in technology, different paths, but both important." My mother nodded, then turned to me with that careful expression I'd come to recognize as her way of broaching sensitive topics. "Speaking of your career, honey, how are things going at work? Are you feeling more secure in your position now?" The question was innocent enough, but something in her tone suggested there was more behind it. I gave my standard response about work going well and opportunities for advancement, the same vague reassurances I'd been offering for years. But then my father cleared his throat in the way he did when he had something important to say. "Actually, son, your mother and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we're here for you if you need anything. We know these first few years in your career can be challenging, and we don't want you to struggle unnecessarily. We've set aside some money that we can lend you if you need help with a car payment or rent or anything like that." The offer hit me like a physical blow. My parents, who were still paying off credit cards and dealing with their own financial stress, had somehow managed to save money specifically to help me through what they perceived as my difficult early career period. They were offering to sacrifice their own financial stability to support a son who didn't need their help, but had convinced them that he did. "Dad, I really appreciate that, but I'm doing fine, you don't need to worry about me. We know you say that, but we also know how expensive it is to live on your own these days. Your entry-level salary can't be very much, and we want you to know that there's no shame in accepting help from your parents. We helped Jessica through medical school, and we want to help you get established too." Jessica nodded in agreement. "I tried to give him some money a few weeks ago, but he's too stubborn to accept it. Maybe if it comes from you guys, he'll actually take it." I sat at my childhood dinner table, surrounded by people who loved me enough to offer financial sacrifices they couldn't really afford, and felt the full weight of my deception crushing down on me. They weren't offering help because they looked down on me or thought I was a failure. They were offering help because they believed I was struggling and they wanted to support me through a difficult time. The generosity and love behind their offers made the lie feel exponentially worse. I promise you, I'm doing better than you think. I don't need financial help right now. But if you do, my mother said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, you'll tell us, right? We're family. We take care of each other. I nodded and promised to ask for help if I needed it, knowing that the help I actually needed had nothing to do with money and everything to do with finding a way out of the elaborate fiction I'd created. As I drove home that night in my deliberately modest car, I realized that my secret wealth had become a prison, trapping me in a lie that was hurting the people I loved most. The psychological toll of maintaining the deception was becoming evident in other areas of my life. I found myself avoiding family gatherings because each interaction required careful performance and constant vigilance to maintain my cover story. I was becoming anxious and withdrawn, constantly worried about saying something that might reveal the truth or contradict some detail of my fictional financial struggles. Sarah began to notice the changes in my behavior. "You seem stressed lately," she said one evening as we watched television in her apartment. "Is everything okay at work? You've been distant the past few weeks." I wanted to tell her everything, to finally share the truth about my situation and end the elaborate charade that was consuming my life. But how do you explain to someone you've been with for 7 years that you've been lying about fundamental aspects of your identity? How do you reveal that the modest lifestyle you've shared together was completely artificial on your part, that you could have been living in luxury but chose to maintain a fiction instead? "Work's been busy lately, just some stressful projects and deadlines." Another lie, another brick in the wall that was separating me from everyone I cared about. The isolation was becoming unbearable. I had enough money to travel anywhere in the world, to buy anything I wanted, to live any lifestyle I chose, but I was trapped in a performance of poverty that prevented me from enjoying any of it. The penthouse sat empty most nights, while I stayed in my modest apartment, maintaining the illusion for neighbors and friends, who might notice if I disappeared too often. The luxury cars I could afford remained unpurchased because they would contradict my carefully constructed image. The investment opportunities and business ventures that excited me had to be pursued in secret through shell companies and false identities that protected my cover story, but left me completely alone with my success. The worst part was watching my family sacrifice for someone who didn't need their sacrifice. Every time my parents offered money they couldn't spare, every time Jessica tried to help with her hard-earned savings, every time someone expressed concern about my fictional financial struggles, the guilt grew heavier. I was taking their love and generosity under false pretenses, allowing them to worry about a problem that didn't exist while hiding the resources that could have solved their actual financial challenges. But I was also afraid of the truth. Afraid of their reaction when they discovered the extent of my deception, afraid of losing their love when they realized I'd been lying to them for years, afraid of the questions about why I'd felt the need to hide my success, about what my secrecy said about my trust in them and my faith in their ability to handle the truth. The lie had become so elaborate and long-standing that revealing it felt more frightening than maintaining it, even as the psychological cost continued to mount. As I sat in my penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights and thinking about my family's offers of help, I realized that my secret wealth had created a prison more confining than poverty ever could have been. I was rich beyond my wildest dreams but unable to enjoy or share my success with the people who mattered most. I had achieved everything I'd worked for, but found myself more isolated and unhappy than I'd ever been when I actually was struggling. The elaborate performance was consuming my life, turning every interaction with family into a carefully scripted scene, every conversation into a potential minefield where one wrong word could expose years of deception. I was living in constant fear of discovery while simultaneously desperately wanting someone to see through the facade and force me to confront the truth I'd been hiding from myself. The morning I discovered Jessica's new Instagram account changed everything. She'd created it specifically to document her financial wellness journey, complete with budget spreadsheets, meal prep photos, and inspirational quotes about building wealth on a resident's salary. The bio read doctor by day, financial planner by night, helping my family achieve their money goals one step at a time. She had 47 followers, mostly family members and medical school friends, and her latest post was a photo of a handwritten budget with the caption, "Setting aside money each month to help my brother get back on his feet, family first, always." I stared at my phone screen in my actual apartment, the modest one I maintained for appearances, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Jessica wasn't just offering help anymore. She was making my supposed financial struggles part of her public identity. She was building her personal brand around being the successful sister who takes care of her less fortunate brother. The comments under her post were filled with heart emojis and supportive messages. "You're such a good sister, and family helping family is what it's all about, and your brother is so lucky to have you." What made it worse was that Jessica genuinely believed she was helping. This wasn't malicious or calculated, it was her authentic attempt to support someone she loved who she thought was struggling. But seeing my fictional poverty become content for her social media presence made the deception feel exponentially more complicated. She wasn't just offering private help anymore, she was publicly positioning herself as my financial savior. 3 days later, Sarah showed me the post. We were having coffee at our usual spot downtown, splitting a muffin because she insisted we needed to watch our spending, when she pulled out her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Did you see what Jessica posted about you?" Her voice was careful, the tone people use when they're not sure how someone will react to sensitive information. I looked at her phone screen, pretending to see the post for the first time, and tried to arrange my features into an appropriate expression of surprise and embarrassment. "She didn't need to post about that. Marcus, this is really sweet, but it's also kind of concerning. I mean, if you're struggling enough that Jessica feels like she needs to budget money to help you, maybe we should talk about it. I don't want you to feel like you have to hide financial problems from me." Sarah's concerned expression made my stomach twist with guilt. Here was another person I loved, offering understanding and support based on information that was completely false. The web of deception was expanding beyond my family to affect my relationship in ways I hadn't anticipated. "I'm not hiding anything from you. Jessica just worries too much, you know how she is. She's always been protective. But Marcus, look at this." Sarah scrolled through Jessica's other posts, showing me a detailed spreadsheet she'd shared titled "Chen Family Financial Goals." My name was listed under family members needing support with a target amount of emergency fund assistance, $2,000, next to it. "She's treating your situation like a family emergency. Are things really this bad?" I found myself in the impossible position of having to convince my girlfriend that I wasn't as poor as my sister was publicly claiming I was, while still maintaining the fiction that I was struggling financially. The cognitive dissonance was making my head spin. "I think Jessica is being dramatic. I'm not destitute or anything. I just live modestly." Modestly is one thing, but this makes it sound like you're barely surviving. And honestly, now I'm wondering if I've been putting too much pressure on you by expecting you to split everything equally. If money is this tight for you, I should be covering more of our expenses. The conversation spiraled into territory I wasn't prepared for. Sarah began insisting that she should pay for our coffee, that she felt guilty for expecting me to contribute equally to our dates, that she wanted to take on more financial responsibility in our relationship. I found myself arguing against her generosity while trying not to reveal why I didn't actually need it, creating an increasingly absurd situation where I was fighting to maintain my right to pay for a $4 muffin. That evening, I called Jessica from my penthouse, pacing back and forth in front of my floor-to-ceiling windows while trying to figure out how to address her social media posts without revealing my actual financial situation. "Hey, I saw your Instagram post about budgeting money to help me. I really appreciate the thought, but I don't want you to feel obligated to support me financially. Marcus, it's not an obligation, it's what family does. And honestly, I think it's important to be open about these things. There's nothing shameful about needing help, and maybe my posts will inspire other people to think about how they can support their family members too. But Jessica, posting about my personal situation makes me uncomfortable. I'd prefer to keep financial matters private. Why? There's nothing embarrassing about going through a tough time after college. Lots of people struggle in their 20s. If anything, your story could help other families understand the importance of supporting each other through difficult transitions. I realized with growing horror that Jessica was turning my fictional struggles into inspiration porn for her social media audience. She wasn't just helping me privately, she was using my supposed financial difficulties as content to demonstrate her own generosity and family values. The performance had taken on a life of its own, becoming part of her public identity in ways I'd never anticipated. I just think some things should stay between family. I'm not sharing anything too personal, I'm just showing people that it's important to take care of each other. Mom and Dad are so proud of how I'm stepping up to help you get established. They think it shows real maturity and responsibility. The revelation that my parents were proud of Jessica for helping me was another twist of the knife. Not only was I allowing my sister to sacrifice her own financial security for me, but my parents were interpreting her generosity as evidence of her character and maturity. The fiction was creating a narrative where Jessica was the responsible, caring daughter who takes care of her struggling brother, while I remained the family member who needed rescue. Over the following weeks, Jessica's posts about me became more frequent and detailed. She shared photos of care packages she was assembling for me, filled with generic groceries and household items she'd bought in bulk to help me stretch my budget. She posted pictures of free community events around Phoenix, tagged with suggestions for fun activities that don't cost money, and encouraging captions about finding joy despite financial constraints. She even started a weekly series called Supporting Siblings Sunday, where she shared tips for helping family members who were getting back on their feet. The posts gained traction among her followers, medical professionals who were dealing with their own student debt and family obligations. Other people began sharing their own stories of helping struggling relatives, creating a whole community around the narrative of successful professionals supporting less fortunate family members. Jessica was becoming something of a micro-influencer in the financial wellness space, and my fictional poverty was the foundation of her growing online presence. Meanwhile, my actual wealth continued to grow at an accelerating pace. A cryptocurrency investment I'd made 2 years earlier suddenly exploded in value, adding another $3 million to my portfolio overnight. One of the startups I'd invested in was acquired by a major tech company, multiplying my initial investment by 15. My rental properties were appreciating so rapidly that I was considering selling them and reinvesting the proceeds in a larger commercial development project. The contrast between my actual financial situation and the story Jessica was telling about me online became increasingly surreal. She posted a photo of herself meal prepping cheap pasta dishes to share with my brother who's learning to budget, while I was receiving dividend payments that exceeded her monthly salary. She shared inspirational quotes about perseverance and family support, while I was sitting in my penthouse reviewing investment reports that showed my net worth approaching $25 million. The psychological strain was affecting every aspect of my life. I found myself constantly monitoring Jessica's social media accounts, anxiety spiking every time she posted something new about our family's financial situation. I was living in fear that she would share some detail that contradicted my cover story, or that one of her followers would somehow connect the dots and realize the truth about my circumstances. Sarah became increasingly concerned about my mental health. "You seem really stressed lately," she said one evening as we walked around her neighborhood. "Are you sure everything's okay? Because if money problems are affecting you this much, maybe we should look into counseling or financial planning services. There are people who can help us figure out a budget that works." The irony was suffocating. My girlfriend was suggesting financial counseling to help me manage money problems that didn't exist, while I was secretly managing a portfolio that most financial advisors would consider remarkably successful. I was pretending to need help with basic budgeting while simultaneously analyzing complex investment opportunities and market trends. I think I'm just feeling overwhelmed by everything. Work stress, family expectations, you know how it is. I do know, and I think you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Jessica's right that there's nothing wrong with accepting help from family. Maybe you should take the money she's offering and use it to reduce some of your stress. We could even use it for a vacation or something fun instead of just survival. The suggestion that I should take Jessica's money for a vacation made me feel physically ill. Not only would I be accepting financial help I didn't need, but I'd be using my sister's hard-earned savings for leisure activities while she continued to sacrifice her own comfort to support me. The moral implications of the deception were becoming more complex and troubling with each passing day. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Jessica started involving our extended family in her mission to help me. She created a group chat called Chen Family Support Network that included our parents, Aunt Linda, Uncle David, and several cousins. The purpose of the chat was to coordinate family efforts to help me through my supposed financial difficulties. I wasn't included in the group chat, but Sarah showed me screenshots that Aunt Linda had shared with her own daughter, who then shared them with Sarah because she thought it was sweet how the Chen family takes care of each other. The messages revealed an elaborate support system that my family had constructed around my fictional poverty. Jessica thinks Marcus might need help with car repairs soon. One message read, "His Honda is pretty old. Maybe we could all chip in for maintenance or help him find a reliable used car." I could ask my friend who works at the Toyota dealership about employee discounts. Uncle David had replied, "Let's wait and see what Marcus actually needs before we start making plans." My mother had written, "We don't want to make him feel like a charity case." Mom's right, Jessica had responded, "But we should be ready to help when he asks." I'm setting aside money each month, and I think we should all consider doing the same. Reading these messages was like watching my family plan an intervention for a problem that didn't exist. They were organizing their financial resources, leveraging their professional connections, and coordinating their efforts to support someone who was secretly wealthier than all of them combined. The love and concern behind their planning made the deception feel cruel and manipulative, even though that had never been my intention. The group chat also revealed how deeply my family had accepted the narrative of my struggles. They discussed my situation with the same concerned tone they might use for a relative dealing with a serious illness or major life crisis. I wasn't just the family member who'd chosen a different career path, I had become the family member who needed rescue, the one whose well-being required active intervention and ongoing support. 3 weeks after discovering the group chat, I received a text from my cousin Tyler, one of the few family members who had never bought into the idea that computer science was a lesser career choice. "Hey man, I heard through the family grapevine that you might be going through a rough patch financially. I just want you to know I'm here if you need to talk or want some advice. I've been through some tough times myself, and I know how isolating it can feel." Tyler's message was kind and genuine, but it revealed how widely the story of my financial struggles had spread throughout our extended family. People I saw only at holiday gatherings were now discussing my supposed poverty and offering support based on information that was completely false. The fictional narrative had become accepted family history, integrated into how everyone understood my place in the Chen family structure. I realized that my deception had created a version of myself that existed independently of my actual identity. There was Marcus Chen the person, living secretly in luxury while managing a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, and there was Marcus Chen the family story, the struggling young professional who needed guidance and financial assistance from his more successful relatives. The two versions were becoming so distinct that I sometimes felt like I was playing a character rather than living my own life. The psychological toll was enormous. I found myself avoiding family events because maintaining the performance was exhausting. I declined invitations to birthday parties and holiday gatherings, claiming work obligations or other commitments because I couldn't handle another afternoon of accepting sympathy I didn't deserve and offers of help I didn't need. Sarah noticed my increasing withdrawal from family activities. "You used to love spending time with your family," she observed after I declined an invitation to Jessica's birthday dinner. "Now you always seem to have an excuse not to go. Are you sure everything's okay between you guys?" "Everything's fine, I've just been busy with work lately." "Marcus, you've been saying that for months, and honestly, your work schedule doesn't seem that demanding compared to Jessica's residency hours. I'm starting to wonder if there's something else going on." Her observation was accurate and troubling. My fake job supposedly required regular hours and reasonable demands, nothing like the intensive schedule of a medical resident. I couldn't claim to be too busy with work without contradicting the image of my modest career that I'd carefully constructed. But I also couldn't attend family gatherings without facing questions, offers of help, and reminders of the elaborate fiction I was maintaining. Maybe I'm just feeling overwhelmed by all the concern about my finances. It's nice that everyone wants to help, but it also makes me feel like a failure. "Oh honey, you're not a failure. Everyone struggles sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with accepting support from people who love you. Your family isn't trying to make you feel bad, they're trying to help you succeed." The conversation highlighted another dimension of the problem I was facing. Sarah interpreted my discomfort with family gatherings as shame about my financial situation, which made her more sympathetic and supportive. She began encouraging me to accept help from my family, to see their offers as expressions of love rather than judgments of my capabilities. Her advice was well-intentioned but completely misguided, based on her belief in a version of my life that didn't exist. As I sat in my penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the elaborate support system my family had constructed around my fictional struggles, I realized that my secret wealth had created a prison more confining than any financial difficulty could have been. I was trapped by abundance, unable to enjoy or share my success because doing so would expose years of deception and fundamentally alter my relationships with everyone I loved. The money that was supposed to represent freedom had become a barrier between me and authentic connection with my family. Every dollar I earned in secret was another lie I had to maintain, another detail I had to remember, another performance I had to sustain. I was rich beyond most people's dreams, but poorer than I'd ever been, in terms of genuine relationships and emotional honesty. The weight of the deception was crushing, but the prospect of revelation felt even more terrifying. How do you tell people who have organized their lives around helping you that you never needed their help? How do you explain that their love and generosity, while genuinely appreciated, were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of your actual circumstances? How do you ask for forgiveness for a lie that had become so elaborate and long-standing that it had shaped how your entire family understood themselves and their relationships with each other? I was approaching a breaking point where maintaining the fiction was becoming more difficult than facing the consequences of the truth. But I was also terrified of losing everything I actually valued: my family's love, Sarah's trust, my sense of belonging in relationships that had been built on false foundations. The secret wealth that was supposed to solve all my problems had created new problems I didn't know how to solve, trapping me in a life where success felt like failure and abundance felt like poverty. The catalyst for everything unraveling came in the form of a phone call from Kevin Park, my business partner in what my family thought was my modest programming job, but was actually my latest venture, a software development company that had just received a $12 million acquisition offer from a Fortune 500 corporation. I was sitting in Sarah's living room, helping her organize coupons for her weekly grocery shopping trip, when Kevin's name appeared on my phone screen. "Marcus, we need to meet immediately. The Morrison Industries people want to close this deal by Friday, but they're insisting on face-to-face negotiations. They're flying their acquisition team to Phoenix tomorrow morning, and they want to meet at your office." The problem was that Kevin thought my office was the modest shared workspace I'd told him about, when in reality, it was the executive suite on the 38th floor of the most prestigious business tower in downtown Phoenix. I'd been juggling multiple versions of my business identity, just like I'd been juggling multiple versions of my personal identity, and now the lies were colliding in ways I couldn't control. "Can't we meet at a restaurant or hotel conference room?" I suggested, glancing at Sarah, who was carefully organizing dollar-off coupons by expiration date. "Marcus, this is a $12 million deal. They want to see our operations, meet our team, understand how we work. We can't conduct this negotiation in a Denny's conference room. They're expecting a professional environment that reflects the value of what we've built." Sarah looked up from her coupons, obviously overhearing enough of the conversation to be intrigued. $12 million. What kind of deal are you working on? I covered the phone's microphone and tried to think of a plausible explanation. "It's just a big client contract Kevin's excited about. You know how sales guys exaggerate numbers." But Sarah's expression had changed from casual interest to focused attention. She'd heard Kevin clearly say acquisition and Morrison Industries, terms that suggested something much more significant than a routine client project. As someone who worked in the nonprofit sector, she understood the difference between service contracts and business acquisitions, and she knew that $12 million wasn't the kind of number that got thrown around casually in ordinary business conversations. "Marcus, that sounded like someone talking about selling a company, not landing a client." I felt the familiar panic that came with my cover story being questioned, but this time it was worse because the questioning was coming from Sarah, whose trust and love I valued more than anyone else's. "Kevin's working on a partnership deal with a bigger company. It's complicated, but it's not as big as it sounds. Morrison Industries is one of the largest tech companies in the country. I've seen their name in the news. If they're interested in partnering with your little software company, that's actually huge, Marcus. Why didn't you tell me about this?" The conversation was spiraling into territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. Kevin was still on the phone, waiting for my response about the meeting location, while Sarah was asking increasingly specific questions about a business deal that would expose the carefully constructed fiction of my modest career. "Kevin, let me call you back in a few minutes. I need to check my calendar." "Marcus, we don't have time for calendar checking. This deal happens this week, or it doesn't happen at all. I need you to commit to hosting this meeting at your office tomorrow at 10 a.m., or I need to know right now if there's some reason you can't do that." Sarah was watching me with growing curiosity and concern. She'd never seen me handle what appeared to be a major business negotiation, and my obvious discomfort with Kevin's demands was raising questions about my professional competence and honesty. "Fine, my office at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Email me the details." After hanging up with Kevin, I found myself facing Sarah's expectant expression and a situation I'd never adequately prepared for. "How do you explain that you've been hiding a multi-million-dollar business acquisition while clipping coupons and splitting grocery bills? Marcus, what's really going on with your work?" Because that conversation sounded like something much bigger than the entry-level programming job you've been describing to me and your family. I could feel the walls of my carefully constructed fiction beginning to crumble. Sarah knew me well enough to recognize when I was being evasive, and she'd overheard enough of Kevin's conversation to know that something didn't add up. The moment I'd been dreading for years was arriving not through some dramatic family confrontation, but through a routine business call that had shattered my ability to maintain separate versions of my identity.
It's complicated. Kevin and I have been working on some side projects that have gotten bigger than we expected. Side projects worth $12 million? Marcus, that's not a side project. That's a major business venture. Why have you been hiding this from me? From your family? If you're involved in something this significant, why is everyone worried about your finances? The questions came rapid fire, each one hitting closer to the core of my deception. Sarah wasn't just curious anymore, she was genuinely confused and concerned about the contradictions she was discovering between my apparent business success and my supposed financial struggles. I haven't been hiding anything exactly. I just didn't want to get anyone's hopes up until we knew if the deal would actually happen. But Marcus, if this deal is real, it changes everything about your financial situation. It changes everything about our relationship, our future plans, our discussions about budgeting and saving money. Have you been lying to me about how much money you have? The direct question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could feel the moment stretching out, the pause becoming longer and more significant with each passing second. Sarah's expression was shifting from confusion to something more serious, a recognition that she might be discovering something fundamental about the person she'd been with for 7 years. I haven't been lying exactly. It's just that my financial situation is more complicated than I've made it seem. More complicated how? Marcus, you either have money or you don't. You either can afford things or you can't. What does complicated mean? I realized that I'd reached the point where half-truths and evasions were no longer sufficient. The business deal with Morrison Industries was going to require me to reveal at least some aspects of my actual financial situation, and Sarah had already heard enough to know that my modest lifestyle didn't match the business opportunities I was apparently involved in. The truth is that I've been more successful with my technology work than I've let on. I've been living modestly by choice, not because I had to. How much more successful? Like you have some savings, or like you're actually wealthy? The question forced me to confront the full scope of what I'd been hiding. There was no version of honesty that could minimize the $25 million I'd accumulated, no way to frame my success as modest when I owned multiple properties and had enough money to retire comfortably for the rest of my life. I've done very well for myself. Better than I've told you or my family. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working through the implications of what I was revealing. She was thinking about all the times we'd split restaurant bills, all the conversations about budgeting for our future together, all the occasions when she'd offered to pay for things because she thought I was struggling financially. Marcus, when you say you've done very well, what exactly does that mean? Because I've been worrying about your finances for months. Your family has been organizing support systems to help you. Jessica has been budgeting money to assist you. Are you telling me that all of that concern was unnecessary? The weight of the deception was becoming impossible to bear. Sarah's questions were stripping away the elaborate justifications I'd constructed for maintaining my secret, forcing me to confront the reality of how my lies had affected everyone around me. I need to show you something, I said finally. But I need you to understand that I never meant for things to get this complicated. I drove Sarah to my penthouse, taking the elevator to the 40th floor while she stood beside me in stunned silence. When the doors opened to reveal the marble foyer of my actual living space, her reaction was immediate and visceral. Oh my God, Marcus, what is this place? This is where I actually live most of the time. The apartment you know about is just for appearances. Sarah walked through my penthouse like she was touring a museum, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the designer furniture, the artwork that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She stood at the windows looking out at the Phoenix skyline, and I could see her trying to reconcile this reality with everything she thought she knew about my life. How long have you been living here? About 3 years. I bought it after my first major business success. And the apartment I thought you lived in. I keep it to maintain the story that I'm just getting by financially. For when family visits, or when I need people to believe I'm living modestly. Sarah turned to face me, and her expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen from her. It wasn't anger, exactly, but something deeper and more troubling. It was the look of someone who was realizing that their entire relationship had been built on fundamental dishonesty. Marcus, I don't understand. Why would you lie about this? Why would you let me worry about your finances? Why would you let your family organize support systems to help you when you clearly don't need help? The questions I'd been dreading for years were finally being asked, and I didn't have good answers. How do you explain that you'd been conducting a psychological experiment on your own family? How do you justify letting people who love you sacrifice their own financial security for a problem that didn't exist? It started small. I just wanted to see how my family would react if I wasn't the success story they expected me to be. And then it became easier to maintain the lie than to explain why I'd been lying in the first place. Easier for who, Marcus? Because it hasn't been easier. I've been limiting my own spending because I thought we needed to save money together. I've been turning down opportunities and experiences because I thought we couldn't afford them. I've been planning our entire future around the assumption that you were barely making ends meet. The full impact of my deception was becoming clear through Sarah's eyes. I hadn't just been lying about my wealth, I'd been constraining her life based on false information about our financial situation. Every time she'd suggested we skip a vacation or avoid an expensive restaurant, every time she'd chosen generic brands at the grocery store, or suggested we find free entertainment options, she'd been making sacrifices for a relationship that she fundamentally misunderstood. I know how this looks, and I know I should have told you the truth earlier, but I was afraid of how it would change things between us. Change things how? By letting me know that the person I love is successful and financially secure. By allowing me to make informed decisions about my own life. Marcus, I've been with you for 7 years thinking I was dating someone who was struggling to establish himself professionally. I've been proud of myself for loving you despite your supposed financial limitations. Do you understand how condescending that makes me feel now? Sarah's words hit me like physical blows. I'd never considered that my deception might make her feel foolish or condescending. I'd been so focused on my own fear of being judged for my wealth that I'd never thought about how my lies were affecting her sense of agency and self-respect. That's not how I meant it. I never wanted you to feel like you were settling for someone unsuccessful, but that's exactly what I thought I was doing, and I was okay with it because I loved you. I thought I was being a supportive partner who valued character over financial success. Now I find out that my support was based on lies, and my values were being tested against a situation that didn't even exist. The conversation continued for hours, with Sarah asking increasingly pointed questions about the extent of my wealth, the details of my business ventures, and the elaborate systems I'd created to maintain my double life. Each revelation made the scope of my deception more apparent and more troubling. When she learned about the rental properties, the investment portfolio, and the multiple business ventures I'd been managing in secret, her shock turned to something approaching disbelief. Marcus, you're not just successful, you're genuinely wealthy. You have more money than most people will see in their entire lives, and you've been pretending to clip coupons and worry about grocery bills. The absurdity of my situation was becoming undeniable. I was one of the wealthiest people either of us knew personally, but I'd been living like someone who needed to check bank balances before making small purchases. The performance had become so elaborate and detailed that even I sometimes forgot which version of my life was real. What about your family? Do they know any of this? No, they still think I'm struggling financially. Jessica has been budgeting money to help me, and my parents have offered to lend me money they can't really afford to spare. Marcus, that's not just lying, that's cruel. You're letting people who love you make financial sacrifices for a problem that doesn't exist. How can you justify that? The question I'd been avoiding for years was finally being asked directly, and I didn't have a justification that made sense even to myself. What had started as a small deception to avoid expectations had evolved into something that was genuinely harmful to people I cared about. I know it sounds terrible when you put it like that, but I got trapped in the lie, and I didn't know how to get out of it without losing everyone's trust and respect. So instead you decided to abuse their trust and respect indefinitely. Marcus, this isn't just about money. This is about fundamental honesty in your relationships with the people who matter most to you. Sarah's assessment was accurate and devastating. I'd been so focused on the fear of losing my family's love if they discovered my deception that I'd never considered that the deception itself was a betrayal of their love and trust. The Morrison Industries meeting the next day forced me to confront the practical implications of maintaining my double life. Kevin had arranged for the acquisition team to meet at what he thought was my modest office space, but the reality was that our company operated out of a prestigious business complex that would immediately contradict everything my family believed about my career. I spent the morning of the meeting in a state of near panic, realizing that any significant business success would be impossible to hide from my family and friends. The acquisition deal, if it went through, would require legal documents, press releases, and financial disclosures that would make my wealth a matter of public record. The meeting itself was surreal. I sat in my executive conference room, negotiating a $12 million business sale while wearing the same thrift store clothes I'd worn to maintain my modest image. The Morrison Industries executives were impressed with our company's operations and growth potential, but I could see their confusion about my personal presentation. I looked like someone who couldn't afford professional attire, despite being half owner of a company they were willing to pay $12 million to acquire. Kevin pulled me aside during a break in negotiations. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Are you having some kind of financial problems I don't know about? Because you're dressed like you can't afford decent clothes, but we're about to become millionaires. Is there something going on in your personal life that I should be concerned about?" Even my business partner was beginning to notice the contradictions between my apparent lifestyle and my actual financial situation. The elaborate performance I'd been maintaining was starting to crumble under the weight of its own complexity. "I just prefer to live modestly. I don't like to show off my wealth." "Marcus, there's a difference between living modestly and looking like you shop exclusively at Goodwill. These Morrison people are wondering if you're financially stable enough to honor the terms of this deal. Your appearance is becoming a business liability." The acquisition negotiation forced me to confront the impossibility of maintaining my secret indefinitely. Success at this level was inherently public, involving lawyers, accountants, and business relationships that would make my wealth visible to anyone who looked closely enough. I could hide a few $1 million in investments and rental properties, but I couldn't hide a $12 million business acquisition from people who were part of my daily life. That evening, I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for dinner at the upscale steakhouse in Scottsdale, where she'd celebrated her medical school graduation. I chose the location deliberately, knowing that it would signal something important about the conversation we were about to have. Jessica arrived wearing scrubs and looking exhausted from a long shift at the hospital. She seemed surprised by my choice of restaurant, glancing around at the expensive decor and extensive wine list with obvious concern. "Marcus, are you sure you can afford this place? I know you wanted to celebrate something, but we could have gone somewhere less expensive." The irony of my wealthy sister worrying about my ability to afford dinner at a restaurant that I could have purchased outright without affecting my budget was almost too much to bear. I'd asked her to meet me here specifically to begin the conversation about my actual financial situation, but seeing her genuine concern made the task feel even more difficult. "Jessica, I need to tell you something important, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react." "Oh God, are you in some kind of serious trouble? Is that why you wanted to meet somewhere nice? Are you sick, or in legal trouble, or what?" Her immediate assumption that I was about to share bad news revealed how completely my family had accepted the narrative of my struggles. In their minds, I was the family member who was most likely to need help or support, the one whose serious conversations probably involved requests for assistance rather than revelations of success. "I'm not in trouble, but I haven't been honest with you about my financial situation. I'm not struggling the way you think I am." "What do you mean? Like you have some savings, or you got a promotion, or what?" "I mean I'm wealthy, Jessica, very wealthy. I have been for several years." My sister stared at me across the table, and I could see her mind working through the implications of what I was telling her. She was thinking about all the money she'd budgeted to help me, all the social media posts she'd made about supporting her struggling brother, all the conversations with our parents about my supposed financial difficulties. "How wealthy are we talking about?" Wealthy enough that I could pay off your student loans, mom and dad's mortgage, and everyone else's debts without it significantly affecting my financial situation. Jessica's expression went through several rapid changes as she processed this information. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and something that looked like betrayal all crossed her face in the span of a few seconds. Marcus, if you have that kind of money, why have you been letting me save money to help you? Why have you been letting mom and dad offer to lend you money they can't afford to spare? Why have I been posting on social media about helping my struggling brother? The questions I'd been dreading were finally being asked, and I could see that Jessica was beginning to understand the full scope of what I'd been hiding from her. She wasn't just upset about the money, she was upset about the fundamental dishonesty of our relationship and the way my lies had affected her own behavior and self-image. I know how this looks, and I know I should have told you earlier, but once I started living modestly, it became harder and harder to explain why I'd been hiding my success. Living modestly, Marcus, you haven't been living modestly, you've been living a lie. There's a difference between choosing not to show off your wealth and actively deceiving your family about your financial situation. Jessica's anger was building as she worked through the implications of my deception. She was realizing that her role as the successful sister who takes care of her struggling brother had been based on completely false information, and that her public identity as someone who supports family members in need was built on a fiction I'd created. How long have you been wealthy? Several years. It started when I sold my first app in college, and it's grown since then, through investments and other business ventures. So when I was struggling through medical school, working part-time jobs, and taking out loans to cover my expenses, you already had enough money to help, but didn't. The question hit at the heart of one of the most troubling aspects of my deception. While Jessica had been genuinely struggling as a student, I'd been secretly accumulating wealth, but maintaining the fiction that I was the one who needed help. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how to offer without revealing my actual situation. So instead you let me struggle alone, while you pretended to be struggling too. Marcus, do you understand how selfish that is? I could have used help during medical school, but instead I was worried about helping you. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with Jessica asking increasingly detailed questions about my wealth, my businesses, and my reasons for maintaining the deception. Each answer seemed to make her more upset as she realized how extensively I'd been lying to everyone who cared about me. What about Sarah? Does she know about this? I just told her yesterday. She's trying to process it too. I can't imagine how betrayed she must feel. 7 years of relationship based on fundamental lies about who you are and what your life is like. Jessica's observation about Sarah's situation was accurate and painful. I'd been so focused on my family's potential reaction to my wealth that I'd never adequately considered how my deception was affecting my romantic relationship and Sarah's ability to make informed decisions about her own life. The conversation ended with Jessica asking me to give her time to process what I'd told her before we discussed it further. She was clearly upset and confused, struggling to reconcile the brother she thought she knew with the reality of what I'd been hiding from her. I need to think about this, Marcus. I need to figure out how I feel about finding out that my entire understanding of our family dynamic was based on lies you've been telling for years. 3 days later, my mother called with a tone I'd never heard from her before. Marcus, Jessica told me about your conversation. I think you need to come over to the house so we can all talk about this as a family. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, with everyone in attendance, including my parents, Jessica, Aunt Linda, and Uncle David. I arrived at my childhood home in my Honda Civic, wearing my usual thrift store clothes, but knowing that this would be the last time I'd need to maintain the performance. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my family. My mother began by asking me to explain, in detail, exactly what my financial situation was and how long I'd been hiding it from them. As I described my wealth, my business ventures, and my investment portfolio, I watched their expressions change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. Marcus, I don't understand why you would let us worry about you unnecessarily, my father said. We've been organizing our finances around helping you get established. We've been making sacrifices to support someone who apparently doesn't need support. Uncle David was more direct. This is the most selfish thing I've ever heard of. You let your family stress about your well-being while you were secretly rich. What kind of person does that to people who love them? The accusations were painful but accurate. I'd been conducting a psychological experiment on my own family, testing their love and support, while hiding information that would have fundamentally changed their understanding of our relationships. Aunt Linda focused on the practical implications of my deception. Marcus, Jessica has been posting about helping you on social media. She's made your supposed financial struggles part of her public identity. How is she supposed to explain to her followers that her struggling brother was actually wealthy the entire time? The question highlighted another dimension of the damage my lies had caused. Jessica's social media presence, her identity as a caring sister who supports family members in need, her advice about family financial planning, all of it had been based on false information I'd provided. I never asked Jessica to post about me on social media. I didn't know she was making my situation public. But you did know she was budgeting money to help you, my mother pointed out. You knew we were all concerned about your finances, and you let us continue being concerned instead of telling us the truth. The family meeting continued for nearly 4 hours, with each family member expressing their feelings about my deception and asking questions about my motivations and timeline. The overwhelming consensus was that my lies had been selfish and hurtful, damaging trust in ways that would be difficult to repair. Jessica was particularly upset about the social media implications. Marcus, I've built an online community around the idea of supporting struggling family members. My followers look up to me because they think I'm helping my brother through difficult times. How am I supposed to explain that the entire foundation of that community was based on lies? The consequences of my deception were rippling outward in ways I'd never anticipated. Jessica's public identity, my parents' financial planning, my extended family's understanding of our relationships, all of it had been shaped by false. The meeting ended with my family asking me to give them time to process what they'd learned and to decide how they wanted to move forward with our relationships. The trust that had been broken wasn't just about money, it was about fundamental honesty in family relationships, and the way my lies had affected everyone's behavior and self-perception. 2 weeks later, Sarah broke up with me. She explained that while she could understand my initial reasons for hiding my wealth, she couldn't forgive the years of deception that had affected her own life choices and financial decisions. Marcus, I've been planning our entire future together, based on false information about who you are and what our life could be like. I can't trust someone who was capable of lying to me for 7 years about something so fundamental. The breakup was devastating, but not surprising. The elaborate fiction I'd maintained had made authentic relationship impossible, creating barriers between me and the person I loved most. My family's reaction was more complex. Over the following months, they gradually began speaking to me again, but the relationships were fundamentally changed. The easy trust and casual intimacy we'd shared before was replaced by a more careful, distant dynamic. Jessica eventually had to address her social media situation, posting a carefully worded explanation about how family financial situations can be more complex than they initially appear. She lost several followers and had to rebuild her online community around different themes. My parents struggled to understand my motivations for maintaining the deception. We raised you to value honesty and family loyalty, my mother said, during one of our first conversations after the revelation. I don't understand how you could lie to us for so long about something so important. The most painful aspect of the aftermath was realizing that my wealth, which I'd thought would solve all my problems, had actually created problems I'd never anticipated. The money that was supposed to represent freedom had become a barrier between me and authentic relationships with everyone I cared about. Months after the revelation, I was sitting in my penthouse, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on the choices that had led me to this point. I had everything I'd ever wanted financially, but I'd lost most of what mattered to me personally. The secret wealth that was supposed to prove my worth had instead demonstrated my willingness to deceive the people who loved me most. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to avoid being judged for my success, I'd created a situation where I was judged much more harshly for my deception. My family could have handled my wealth. They couldn't handle years of elaborate lies about something so fundamental to our relationships. As I sat alone in my expensive apartment, surrounded by all the material symbols of success I'd accumulated, I realized that the greatest cost of my secret wealth hadn't been financial, it had been the authentic relationships and genuine trust that I'd sacrificed to maintain a fiction that had ultimately served no purpose other than my own psychological comfort. The money was still there, growing larger each day through investments and business ventures, but the family relationships and romantic partnership that had given my life meaning were damaged, possibly beyond repair, by my decision to prioritize the security of wealth over the vulnerability of truth. I'd gotten everything I'd worked for financially, but I'd lost everything that actually mattered. The secret fortune that was supposed to make every relative jealous had instead made them distrust me in ways that money couldn't fix. 6 months after the revelation, I found myself sitting in a therapist's office in Tempe, trying to explain to a complete stranger why I'd spent years deceiving everyone I loved. Dr. Raymond Mitchell specialized in family dynamics and relationship repair, and he'd been recommended by my former business partner, Kevin, who'd witnessed the fallout of my secret life with a mixture of bewilderment and concern. "What I'm hearing, Doctor," Mitchell said, during our fourth session, "is that you created an elaborate test for your family's love, but you never gave them the opportunity to pass or fail based on accurate information. You rigged the entire experiment." His observation cut through all the rationalizations I'd been clinging to. I'd told myself that I was protecting my family from having expectations about my wealth, that I was maintaining my independence, that I was being cautious about how money changes relationships, but the truth was simpler and more troubling than any of those explanations. I'd been afraid that if my family knew I was successful, they would judge me differently, expect things from me, or treat me as a resource rather than a person. I think I was afraid that if they knew I had money, that's all they would see when they looked at me. And instead, you made sure they saw a fiction. Marcus, do you understand that what you were really afraid of was being known, not being judged for your wealth, but being truly seen and understood by the people closest to you? The therapy sessions were helping me understand the psychological mechanisms behind my deception, but they weren't solving the practical problem of how to repair relationships that had been fundamentally damaged by years of lies. My family was still speaking to me, but the conversations were strained and careful, lacking the easy warmth that had characterized our interactions before the revelation. Jessica had stopped posting on social media entirely after the
truth came out. Her carefully curated online presence, built around themes of family support and financial responsibility, had become impossible to maintain once her followers learned that the brother she'd been helping was actually wealthier than she was. She'd received angry messages from people who felt deceived, accusations that she'd been using a fake story for attention and validation. "I'm not upset about the followers I lost," she told me during one of our first real conversations after the family meeting. "I'm upset that I built part of my identity around helping you, and it turns out you were just letting me perform care and concern for an audience while you watched from your secret penthouse." Her words stung because they were accurate. I had been watching my family perform concern and care for me, observing their reactions like a scientist studying subjects in an experiment. The cruelty of that dynamic was becoming clearer to me with each therapy session and each difficult conversation with family members. My parents had taken the revelation hardest in some ways. They'd spent years worrying about my ability to support myself, feeling guilty that they'd invested so much in Jessica's medical education while I supposedly struggled with my career choice.
Learning that their concern had been manipulated made them question their own judgment and parenting. Your father hasn't been sleeping well, my mother confided during a phone call 3 months after the family meeting. He keeps saying he should have known something was off, that he failed as a parent by not seeing through your act. I keep telling him it's not his fault, but he's taking this very personally. The guilt of knowing that my deception had affected my father's sense of himself as a parent was almost unbearable. I'd never intended to make him doubt his own judgment or parenting abilities. I'd just been so focused on maintaining my secret that I'd never considered how the eventual revelation would affect everyone's self-perception and confidence. The Morrison Industries acquisition had gone through despite the personal chaos in my life. The $12 million had been divided between Kevin and me, adding another $6 million to my already substantial wealth, but the money felt meaningless in the context of what I'd lost. I would have traded the entire amount to restore the easy trust and genuine connection I'd once had with my family. Kevin had been surprisingly understanding about the whole situation, perhaps because he hadn't been personally victimized by my deception the way my family had been. Marcus, I've known a lot of wealthy people who do weird things with their money and their identities. Your situation is unusual, but it's not incomprehensible. You just need to figure out how to make amends and move forward. Making amends proved to be far more complicated than simply apologizing. Jessica wanted me to publicly acknowledge on social media that her posts about helping me had been based on false information I'd provided, essentially asking me to take responsibility for the damage to her online reputation. My parents wanted me to explain in detail why I'd felt the need to lie to them, what that said about my trust in their love, and how I planned to rebuild that trust going forward. The extended family had their own reactions and demands. Aunt Linda felt personally betrayed because she'd shared her concerns about my finances with other relatives, positioning herself as someone who was worried about my well-being. Learning that her concern had been unnecessary made her feel foolish and manipulated. Uncle David was more direct in his anger, telling me at a family barbecue that I'd shown a fundamental character flaw by lying to people who loved me. "You know what bothers me most?" Uncle David said, standing near the grill with a beer in his hand and genuine hurt in his eyes. "It's not that you were rich and pretended to be poor. It's that you watched us all worry about you and did nothing to relieve that worry. You let us stress about your well-being when you could have simply told us the truth. That's not about money, Marcus, that's about basic human decency." His words echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. He was right that my deception had been fundamentally cruel in its disregard for other people's emotional well-being. I'd prioritized my own psychological comfort over their peace of mind, allowing them to experience unnecessary worry and stress because I was afraid of how they might react to my success. Tyler, my cousin, who had always been supportive, took a different approach. He called me a few weeks after the family meeting and suggested we meet for coffee, just the two of us. When we sat down at a cafe in downtown Phoenix, he looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Marcus, I'm trying to understand what you were thinking all these years. Help me make sense of this, because from the outside, it looks like you were conducting some kind of cruel social experiment on your own family. That's pretty much what my therapist said too. So what were you actually trying to accomplish? What did you think would happen?" The question forced me to articulate something I'd been avoiding in all my conversations with family members. I think I was trying to prove that they loved me for who I am, not for what I could provide. But I realize now that I never gave them the chance to demonstrate that because I was lying about who I actually am. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "You know what's ironic? Your family probably would have been excited about your success if you'd shared it honestly. They might have asked for your advice or wanted to celebrate your achievements, but that's not the same thing as loving you for your money. You confused being known with being used." His observation was remarkably similar to what Dr. Mitchell had been trying to help me understand in therapy. I'd conflated vulnerability with exploitation, assuming that if people knew about my wealth, they would inevitably try to take advantage of me. But that assumption had prevented me from ever discovering whether my family could handle the truth with grace and maturity. What do I do now? How do I fix this? I don't know if you can fix it completely. Trust isn't like a broken vase that you can glue back together and pretend was never damaged. It's more like a broken bone that needs time to heal, and even after it heals, there's always going to be a place where the break happened. Tyler's metaphor was apt and discouraging. The relationships with my family would never be the same as they were before the revelation. Even if we eventually rebuilt trust and connection, there would always be the memory of my deception, the knowledge that I'd been capable of lying to them for years about something fundamental. The situation with Sarah remained unresolved and painful. She'd been clear that she didn't want to continue our relationship, but she'd also expressed sadness about how things had ended. We met for coffee about 4 months after our breakup, at her request, and the conversation was one of the most difficult I'd ever had. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "And I realize that I'm not just angry about the money. I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. We were together for 7 years, Marcus. 7 years of sharing our lives, making plans together, being vulnerable with each other about everything except the thing that was most important. I know I should have told you. I was afraid that knowing about the money would change how you felt about me, but it did change how I felt about you, just not in the way you expected. Finding out about your wealth didn't make me love you less or see you as just a resource. Finding out that you'd been lying to me for years, that's what changed everything." Sarah's voice cracked slightly as she continued. "I keep thinking about all the times we talked about our future together, about saving up for a house, about being careful with money, about building our life slowly and responsibly. And the whole time, you knew that none of those constraints were real. You were letting me make life decisions based on false information. I wanted our relationship to be about us, not about my money. But Marcus, your money is part of who you are. Not because it defines your worth as a person, but because it's a result of your skills and work and decisions. By hiding your wealth, you weren't protecting our relationship from being about money. You were making our relationship be about lies instead." The conversation with Sarah helped me understand something crucial about my deception. I'd thought I was preserving authenticity by hiding my wealth, but I'd actually been preventing authenticity by hiding a fundamental truth about my life and identity. Real intimacy requires honesty about who we are, including the parts of ourselves that we're afraid might change how others perceive us. Is there any chance you might reconsider breaking up? I know I hurt you, but I'm working on understanding why I did what I did, and I want to make things right." Sarah looked at me with genuine sadness in her eyes. "Marcus, I loved the person I thought you were. I loved the struggling programmer who was building his career and staying humble despite challenges. But that person doesn't exist. You're someone else entirely, and I don't know if I can trust that person enough to build a life with him. I'm still the same person, the only thing that's changed is that you know more about my financial situation." "No, that's not the only thing that changed. I also know that you're capable of maintaining an elaborate deception for years. I know that you're willing to let people make sacrifices for you based on false information. I know that when you're scared or uncomfortable, you choose lying over vulnerability. Those aren't minor character traits, Marcus, those are fundamental aspects of who you are as a person." Sarah's assessment was harsh but fair. My deception hadn't just been about money, it had revealed something about my character and my approach to relationships that was deeply troubling. I'd chosen comfort over honesty, control over vulnerability, and in doing so, I demonstrated that I was willing to manipulate the people I loved to avoid facing my own fears. We parted that day with a sense of finality that was crushing but necessary. Sarah needed to move forward with her life, and I needed to accept that some consequences of my choices were permanent and irreversible. Not every broken relationship could be repaired, no matter how much money I had or how sincerely I apologized. The following months were a period of difficult reckoning. I sold my penthouse and moved into a more modest home that reflected my actual preferences rather than either extreme of my double life. I started being honest with new people I met about my financial situation, neither hiding my wealth nor leading with it in ways that made it the central focus of my identity. I also began using my money in ways that felt meaningful and redemptive. I paid off Jessica's student loans without asking for gratitude or recognition, framing it as an overdue wedding gift even though she wasn't getting married. I paid off my parents' mortgage and established education funds for my younger cousins. I donated substantial amounts to the nonprofit where Sarah had worked, doing so anonymously to avoid the appearance of trying to buy forgiveness or goodwill. These actions didn't repair the damaged relationships, but they represented a shift in how I understood my wealth. Money wasn't something to hoard and hide, it was a resource that could be used to support people and causes I cared about. My secrecy had prevented me from using my wealth in meaningful ways, trapping me in a prison of my own making where abundance felt like scarcity. Jessica and I gradually developed a new relationship that was more honest but less intimate than what we'd had before. She was cordial and even occasionally warm, but there was a guardedness that hadn't been there in our earlier interactions. She was careful about what she shared with me, conscious that I'd proven myself capable of hiding significant truths even in close relationships. "I want us to have a good relationship," she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings, a ritual we'd established to maintain connection while acknowledging the damage that had been done. "But I need you to understand that trust is rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions over time. You can't expect me to go back to how things were just because you're being honest now. I understand, I'm grateful for whatever relationship you're willing to have with me. The thing is, Marcus, I'm still processing how I feel about all of this. Some days I'm angry that you let me waste energy worrying about you. Other days, I'm sad that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, and sometimes I'm just confused about why you thought this deception was necessary in the first place." Her honesty about the complexity of her emotions was helping me understand the full impact of my choices. This wasn't a simple matter of apologizing and moving on. The damage I'd done had created lasting emotional complexity that would take years to fully process and integrate. My parents' relationship with me evolved into something more formal and less spontaneous. They still invited me to family gatherings, but the easy intimacy of dropping by unannounced or calling just to chat had disappeared. Every interaction felt deliberate and slightly staged, as if we were all performing normalcy rather than experiencing it authentically. "Your mother and I are trying to understand," my father said during one of our conversations. "But Marcus, you have to realize that you fundamentally changed how we think about our own judgment and parenting. We keep asking ourselves what we did wrong that made you feel like you couldn't trust us with the truth about your life. You didn't do anything wrong, this was about my own fears and insecurities, not about any failure on your part as parents. But we must have done something to make you think you needed to hide your success from us. Parents are supposed to create an environment where their children feel safe being honest. We obviously failed at that somehow." The conversation revealed another dimension of the damage I'd caused. My parents weren't just hurt by my deception, they were questioning their entire approach to parenting and wondering what they'd done to create a child who would lie so extensively to his own family. Their self-doubt was one of the unintended consequences of my choices that I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Mitchell helped me work through the guilt and regret that were threatening to become overwhelming. "Marcus, you made choices that hurt people you love. That's true, and you need to accept responsibility for that, but drowning in guilt doesn't help anyone. What helps is learning from your mistakes and committing to different behavior going forward." "How do I forgive myself for what I did?"
Forgiveness isn't about saying that what you did was okay. It's about accepting that you're human, that you made mistakes, rooted in fear and insecurity, and that you're capable of learning and growing from those mistakes. Self-forgiveness is a process, not a destination. The therapy sessions were gradually helping me develop a more nuanced understanding of my motivations and choices. I'd spent years living in fear of being judged for my success, but the irony was that the judgment I ultimately faced was for my dishonesty rather than my wealth. My family could have handled my success, they struggled to handle my deception. A year after the revelation, Jessica called me with unexpected news. She'd met someone, a fellow physician named Thomas, who worked in the emergency department at her hospital. They'd been dating for several months, and she wanted me to meet him. "I need to know that you're going to be honest with Thomas about who you are," she said. "I can't have my relationship with him be affected by more secrets and lies from you." "I'll be completely honest, I promise." Meeting Thomas was strange because he already knew the whole story of my deception and its fallout. Jessica had told him everything, using my situation as a cautionary tale about the importance of honesty in relationships. When we met for dinner, Thomas looked at me with curiosity rather than judgment. "Jessica told me about what happened with your family," he said, after we'd ordered our meals. "I hope you don't mind that she shared that with me." "I don't mind. It's part of my history, and it's important information for anyone who's going to be in Jessica's life." "Can I ask you something? What was it like, maintaining that kind of deception for so long? The psychological toll must have been enormous." His question was thoughtful, rather than accusatory, and I found myself being more honest with this stranger than I'd been with most of my family during the entire period of my deception. It was exhausting and isolating. I felt like I was constantly performing, always worried about saying something that would contradict my cover story. And the worst part was that the longer it went on, the harder it became to imagine telling the truth. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I work in emergency medicine, and we see a lot of cases where people's secrets end up causing more harm than whatever they were trying to hide. Medical conditions that go untreated because people are embarrassed to get help, domestic situations that escalate because people are afraid to ask for assistance. Your situation is different, but the underlying dynamic is similar. The fear of being known can be more dangerous than whatever we're actually hiding." His perspective as a physician who dealt with the consequences of secrets and shame was illuminating. I'd thought my situation was unique, but it was actually a common human pattern, hiding parts of ourselves because we're afraid of judgment or rejection, and in doing so, creating more serious problems than honesty ever would have caused. The dinner with Jessica and Thomas felt like a small step toward normalcy, even though the relationship between Jessica and me was still marked by the history of my deception. Seeing her happy with someone who knew the truth about our family dynamics was bittersweet. She was building an honest relationship while I was still dealing with the consequences of years of dishonesty. 2 years after the revelation, my parents invited me to their home for what my mother described as an important family conversation. I arrived with some anxiety, unsure what they wanted to discuss, but hoping it would be an opportunity for genuine connection rather than another recounting of my failures. Both my parents were there, along with Jessica and Thomas, who had gotten engaged the previous month. We sat in the living room, where I'd grown up, surrounded by family photos that now felt like artifacts from a different era of our relationships. "Marcus, we wanted to talk to you about something," my mother began. "Your father and I have been discussing this for several months, and we've decided it's time to address it directly." My stomach clenched with worry about what they might be planning to say. Were they going to formally limit my role in the family? Ask me not to attend certain events, establish boundaries about what I could and couldn't be involved in? "We want you to know that we've been working on forgiving you," my father said. "Not forgetting what happened, but genuinely working toward forgiveness. And we realized that part of our difficulty in moving past this has been that we never really heard you explain, in your own words, why you did what you did."
I've tried to explain in previous conversations, you've apologized and acknowledged that what you did was wrong, my mother interjected. But you've never really helped us understand what was going on in your mind during all those years. We need to understand the why before we can fully move forward. The request was reasonable but daunting. They were asking me to be vulnerable in exactly the ways I'd been avoiding for years, to expose the fears and insecurities that had motivated my deception. I think I was afraid, I began slowly, that if you knew I was successful, that's all you would see when you looked at me, that I would become the family bank, or the person everyone expected to solve their problems with money. I was afraid of losing my identity as just Marcus, your son, and becoming Marcus the wealthy one. But Marcus, Jessica said gently, by hiding your wealth, you didn't preserve your identity. You created a false identity that prevented us from knowing who you really are. I know that now, but at the time, it felt like I was protecting something important. I was protecting the ability to have relationships that weren't complicated by money. My father leaned forward in his chair. Son, did you really think we would love you differently if we knew you were successful? Did you think our love was so conditional that financial success would change it? The question hit at the core of my insecurities. I think I was afraid that success would raise expectations, that you'd expect me to behave in certain ways or use my money in ways you thought were appropriate. I wanted to avoid those expectations by simply not telling you about the money. But in avoiding those expectations, you created a situation where we had entirely wrong expectations about your life, my mother pointed out. We expected you to struggle, to need help, to be working toward stability. Those expectations shaped how we interacted with you, and they were based on complete fiction. The conversation continued for hours, with my family asking questions and me trying to provide honest answers about my motivations and thought processes during the years of deception. It was painful and uncomfortable, but it was also the first time I'd really been able to explain myself without the defensive posture I'd maintained in earlier conversations. I think what bothers me most, Jessica said, near the end of the conversation, is that you chose to let us worry unnecessarily. You could have told us the truth at any point, and you chose not to. That choice, repeated over and over for years, is what makes this so hard to forgive. I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could go back and make different choices, but I can't. All I can do is be honest going forward, and hope that's enough to eventually rebuild trust. Thomas, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, spoke up. Marcus, from an outside perspective, it seems like you were trying to solve a problem that didn't exist. Your family wanting to celebrate your success, or occasionally asking for your input on financial matters, isn't the same thing as exploiting you. You created this elaborate defense against a threat that was mostly in your imagination. His observation was astute, and similar to insights my therapist had shared. I'd constructed an elaborate defense system against imaginary attacks, and in doing so, I'd done real damage to actual relationships. The family meeting ended with a sense of cautious hope. My parents and Jessica weren't ready to declare everything resolved, but they were willing to continue working toward forgiveness and rebuilt trust. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation I might have hoped for, but it was honest and real in ways that felt more valuable than any quick fix would have been. 3 years after the revelation, I received an invitation to Jessica's wedding. The invitation itself felt like a milestone, evidence that my family still considered me enough of a family member to include me in major life events. I attended the wedding with a mixture of gratitude and melancholy, aware that I was there on conditional terms, rather than with the easy inclusion I'd once taken for granted. During the reception, my father pulled me aside for a private conversation. We stood on the terrace of the venue, looking out at the Phoenix skyline, illuminated by the setting sun. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately, about what it means and how it works. Me too. I've realized that forgiveness isn't about saying that what you did was okay. It's about deciding not to let what happened define our entire relationship going forward. Your mother and I, we've decided to forgive you. Not because we've forgotten what happened or because we think it wasn't serious, but because we want to have a relationship with our son more than we want to hold on to anger and hurt. The words brought tears to my eyes. After 3 years of damaged relationships and painful conversations, this moment of grace felt almost overwhelming. Thank you, Dad. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it. You're right that you don't deserve it. None of us ever deserve forgiveness when we hurt people we love. But that's kind of the point of forgiveness. It's a gift, not something you earn through good behavior. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the city where I'd built my secret fortune and lost my family's trust. The view from the terrace was beautiful, but it didn't compare to the view from my penthouse, the one I'd sold years ago, as part of my attempt to build a more honest life. I sold the penthouse, I told my father. I'm living more modestly now, in a house that actually reflects who I am, rather than performing either wealth or poverty. Good. Not because there's anything wrong with wealth, but because it sounds like you're finally being honest with yourself about who you are and how you want to live. The wedding reception continued around us, a celebration of Jessica finding love and building a life based on honesty and mutual understanding. As I watched her dance with Thomas, I felt genuinely happy for her success and her relationship, unmarred by the jealousy or competition that had sometimes characterized our sibling dynamic. Years of therapy, difficult conversations, and genuine effort to change had helped me develop a more mature understanding of wealth, family, and honesty. I'd learned that money was just a tool, neither good nor bad in itself, but capable of being used for connection or isolation depending on how I chose to handle it. I'd learned that vulnerability was necessary for intimacy, and that protecting myself from imaginary threats often created real damage in actual relationships. The journey from secret wealth to honest poverty had been painful and costly, measured not in dollars, but in broken trust and damaged relationships. But it had also been necessary, a forced confrontation with fears and insecurities that I'd been avoiding for years. As the evening ended and I drove home to my modest house, I reflected on how far I'd come from the young man who'd sold his first app and decided to hide his success from everyone he knew. That Marcus had been afraid of being known, terrified of being judged, convinced that honesty would cost him the love and respect of his family. The current Marcus understood that dishonesty had cost him far more than honesty ever could have, and that real love required real truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. The money was still there, invested and growing, but it no longer defined my identity or dictated my choices. I was learning to use it wisely and generously to support causes I cared about and help people in ways that felt meaningful rather than manipulative, but more importantly, I was learning to be honest about who I was, including the parts of myself that I'd once been desperate to hide. The secret fortune that was supposed to make everyone jealous had instead taught me that authentic relationships were worth more than any amount of money, and that the real treasure wasn't in my investment portfolio, but in the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust with people who'd chosen to forgive me despite having every reason not to. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.